You're very welcome to the third in our series of talks on St. Brigid, leading up to the sesquimillennial, I think is the term, the 1500th anniversary next year. These talks are being held under the auspices of the County Kildare Federation of Local History Groups and with the support of Kildare County Council through the Brigid 1500 programme. Our guest speaker today, you've probably all heard him or seen him on radio or television in the context of travel matters, particularly during lockdown and COVID, when he was the go-to man as to what was happening or what wasn't happening internationally. But of course there's a lot more to Eoghan than that. I've known Eoghan for years, but I actually just looked up Wikipedia last night to see what it had to say. It's always a dangerous thing to do. But this tells me, Eoghan, that for services to tourism, you were designated a Kentucky Colonel and a Freeman of the City of Baltimore. So do we call you Colonel Corry?
I'd expect a salute from you.
Absolutely, yeah, military parade. Anyway, as I say, but much more to Eoghan than that. He basically described as the lead commentator on travel for media in Ireland, having edited travel sections in national newspapers and travel publications since the 1980s. A former sports writer and sports editor, he has written many books on sports history, was a founding story editor of the GAA Museum at Croke Park. He's a list of publications as long as your arm. I won't go through them all. I suppose the one of most interest to us, maybe here in Kildare, is the centenary history of Kildare GAA, and I gather you've been updating that, Eoghan, and I presume there's a new version to come shortly. So I think we'll all be looking out for that. So anyway, enough from me. The title of Eoghan's talk today, I have seen it before, and it is fascinating. Is the St. Brigid Code. So over to you all.
Thank you, Brian, for the lovely introduction. I'm very much a Kildare man, and if Donald Trump was around today running for Kildare County Council in the elections, the slogan I'd like him to pick up out of the St. Brigid 1500 celebrations is "Make Kildare Great Again." There's a lot of really good knowledge and very great experts and people who are very knowledgeable on theology, on history, on ancient language have written about St. Brigid. She's hundreds and hundreds of publications. So the only little bit of her I'm going to bring to the party this morning is the St. Brigid Code, is to sort of work out how the story of St. Brigid came to have so many strands to it. How every single generation decided they were going to have their own St. Brigid. They almost was a constant regeneration, reinvention of St. Brigid. And it's a fascinating thing to look at not so much the story of St. Brigid, which Niamh Wycherley and people like that have done so well, but the story of the telling of the story of St. Brigid. And how, when you go back into those documents, and I spent a lot of time in COVID during lockdown trying to educate myself in a language that was last spoken in 900 AD, the old Irish, the old form of Irish. Anyone who has sat and suffered through Peg Sayers will not be a fan of the grammar of modern Irish, but it's wonderful compared with the convoluted grammar of old Irish. And that's really important because a lot of what was written in the oldest Irish is about saints, and the very first saint we have a biography of is St. Brigid. But I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start with technology. It wasn't here this time last year, never mind 1500 years ago when St. Brigid was coming to the end of his career. I asked ChatGPT to tell me the story of St. Brigid. And here it comes, intertwined with the Christian tradition, the story about her dedication, her as a young woman, the cloak out of the rushes, the devotion, the piety, and the numerous miracles, turning water into beer, multiplying food. ChatGPT, this is in real time, by the way. I videoed this as it comes up. That's the speed that artificial intelligence writes things for you nowadays, if you ask it a question. And that's St. Brigid pretty much as the internet has put her, because that's how ChatGPT, it isn't, artificial intelligence isn't intelligent, it just picks up what's available. This is her spread. This is where these are the images of St. Brigid that you'll find all over Europe. That's Bergamo. $49.99 in Ryanair, by the way, to Bergamo. I looked it up this morning. Cologne. You'll find in almost every country in Western Europe. And she's a saint in the Orthodox Church as well. Not many people get that. St. Brigid's Day is celebrated in Bulgaria, Romania and Russia, Ukraine as a saint. And that's Glastonbury, which got a lot of publicity last year because the Kildare tourism people did a mission over there to London. And this is Strasbourg. I think Liam is a big fan of Strasbourg and is coming to give a separate talk on how a parish got named. I won't steal Liam's thunder. And this is Brian found this in the south of France, the calming of the storm. Now, very, very interesting that a lot of these miracles weren't identified. They were found by scholars in recent years, in the 1800s, 1900s, and they found all these frescoes of saints. And saints in the pre-literate age were identified not by their name. People didn't write their name on it, but they were given a symbol. The most famous that everybody in the room will be familiar with because of the Camino is the shell of Santiago de Compostela, St. Jacob. But each of these saints had a little sort of a symbol. And a lot of the saints that have been uncovered, particularly if been redecorating old monasteries, we haven't found out who they are. And even in the last 3 years, St. Brigid has been cropping up in Spain and Portugal and France as people start, there's the heritage movement is really strong and people start taking the plaster. They find these saints. It takes ages to identify some of them. And then this is in Bruges, and this is one of the oldest surviving images from one of the chapter books of St. Brigid from 1400s, a very 1400s woman. And this is Lisbon, Igreja de São Roque, and it's where St. Brigid's relics are. They were brought there in 1269 by a group of adventurers from Ireland, knights from Ireland. It depends what you describe. But the date is of particular interest because 1269 was after the Norman invasion. And it looks like maybe they weren't the bones of St. Brigid at all, because they were moved from Kildare in the 800s and ended up apparently in Downpatrick. But all of this was written 700 years after she died. And this is the relic of St. Brigid in St. John's Church. And it's very easily found because it's nearly at the end of the runway in Lisbon Airport. If you're early for a flight, or if you've got a little bit of time in your hand, it's very easy to go to the parish church of Lumiar, and it's almost indistinct there in a corner in a side chapel. And there's this poster they put up because they're celebrating the 1500 years as well. So that's the reach of St. Brigid right across Europe. And there's another set of that set of bones, small set of bones, was where they took another set to another church in Lisbon and to some in Dublin. They were bequeathed in the 1930s when the cult of St. Brigid was very, very strong. That's the source of the relics, and it's right beside the Sporting Lisbon Stadium. Sporting Lisbon play on green, and I like to think every time they win a match, St. Brigid is blessing them. So here's the church, Lumiar, parish church in Lumiar, and I think more could be made out of that because it's a very conducive to contact from Ireland, to travel links from Ireland. So the landscape of Brigid, it's all around us. And here we have the first little bit of controversy that I'm going to inject into the room this morning. St. Brigid's birthplace, she was of a people called the Faughart, and it ended up from about 1400s that was associated with the Faughart, the town in County Louth. But it's more likely that the home place of the Faughart, and we're so far back in the past here, it's an awful lot of guesswork. Almost everything that was written about Brigid was written 400 years after she was dead. So Croghan Hill, very spiritual, very simple, and that seems to have a very strong spiritual connection with St. Brigid, and seems to be where she originated from. And when you look at the landscape of Kildare of the 400s, it was it was a rich land. It was where the more powerful of the various peoples would have settled, and for about 300 years, the kingship of Leinster was run from Kildare. Now, political capitals in the old days, they're a modern invention. We didn't have, like the Holy Roman Empire in Germany, the more powerful German state, never had a political capital. London only emerged as a political capital in the 1300s. But what the people who ran Kildare and ran Leinster, the O'Mall dynasty, the House of Mall, would have run their dynasty from Knockallen, which is now one of the designated or potentially designated royal sites for UNESCO heritage status. And there were famously three places that the O'Dúnlainn, the House of Dúnlainn, ran their kingdom from. One of them was Mullamast, one of them was Naas na Ree, the other one was Lions Hill in Artloch, near where I come from and Brian comes from. But while the political capital was generally, there wasn't a political cap, there was an inauguration site. Tara was an inauguration site. Awanwaka was an inauguration site. And the politics tend to be mobile. We know that from the law tracts, which said that you had to have hospitality for your kings. But what didn't move was your religious sites. And this is the first city, the first town in Ireland. Civitas is the phrase that Cogitosus uses for Kildare. It's the only town in Ireland to get that designation as early as that. And that means that it was regarded as a conurbation. There's a sort of a mythology, you find it in the Christy Moore song, that the Vikings came and built the towns. There were towns in Ireland before the Vikings, and Kildare was probably the oldest of it. There are 11 even on a modern map, there are 11 roads converging on Kildare, very, very large number for a small town. All roads lead to Rome, all roads led to Kildare at some stage. But our problem in Kildare, and let's go back to Donald Trump, let's make Kildare great again, was that Kildare town was crumbling from the moment that the Vikings started their raids. It was too vulnerable. And by the time even the Normans had arrived, it was past its sell-by date, and there are descriptions of it in the 1600s and 1700s as being just a mess of ruins. So we don't have any picture of what Kildare was like at the height of its grandeur. The cathedral's a recreation. The cathedral's a 19th century recreation, and the description in Cogitosus, it has to be taken with a grain of salt, because there isn't any mention of Kildare in the very early biographies, but there is a very strong sense in Cogitosus that he was trying to project Kildare as the centre of the universe, not for travel purpose. It's a great travelogue, actually. The great piece of travel writing. You can imagine Catherine Thomas, doing the modern version. But what churches had become within a very short period of time was all about the money, all about the donations, all about how much money you could get from people to come to get their cures, and to get any sort of supernatural favours, which is what really the business of hagiography and the construction of saints across Europe. What do we know about the nature and with the attributes of the nature? We know very, very little about the real woman, but this is what's being attributed to her, and it's really interesting. Dairying. So many of her miracles, and she has so many miracles. She has 126 miracles in one life, the Bacha Bricha, in the first of one of the three oldest lives. That's more than St. Patrick and St. Columcille put together. That's more than Jesus had in the Bible. So she has so many miracles, and they are the third milking from the cow. They're about the things that mattered in rural Ireland right up till our generation. About when the sun rises, the grass grows, the cows milk, and the death of a cow is a tragedy. So all of these, when you wanted to invoke protection for that way of life that we all love so much and we all came from, and it's in our ancestry, is that St. Brigid was the woman. And that maybe is what made her such a great export. They say Kerrygold was the first great export and are associated with the Irish dairy industry. St. Brigid, I would argue, is the very first. And the imagery of St. Brigid with cattle and her association with cattle goes right back into the very, very earliest miracles, because of the 126 miracles, a lot of them will be unfamiliar to us now, and I'll come to the miracle that everyone knows about Brigid, and it's a modern invention. Politics. Where you have church, you have politics. Where you have money, you have politics. Where you have pilgrims coming, you have politics. This is the politics of Kildare. The House of Mal was probably in power when Brigid was at the heights of her, but they got wiped out because they left so few written records. All we know is that they ended up in Wicklow, and the House of Dunling took over, and the Faughart people who came from Croghan Hill were associated with the House of Mal rather than the House of Dunling. But when the miracles all got written down, it was Dunling, the House of Dunling, that ended up with all the political connections of St. Brigid. The Eoghan, it's down at the bottom of your screen there, and then you see the Eoghan, who used to be in Kildare, over in County Wicklow, and the Eoghan, who were always troublesome. Offaly is named for them. So we know from what Seamus Darby did to Kerry that they were always troublesome. But they were, they're on that border territory from where St. Brigid originally came from. I showed you a very brief slide of Faughart, the parade in Flower. We don't want to rain on Faughard's parade. There's a great sense in the St. Brigid 1500. Faughart is part of it. But I think Faughart are probably missing something more important. There are only 3 female saints with a full biography, and one of them was Faughart, and she's got wiped out by, the memory has been obscured by the fact that they took Brigid on board. So really, Brigid's geography doesn't go very, very much beyond Kildare. From the territory of the Eoghan in the top there, and the Eoghan and the Dunling were the Dunling and the O'Neill, who are the ones who were in the kingdom of Meads there. They're most associated with Tara, very, very famous, King Lear. They would have very quickly latched on to the hagiography of St. Patrick and became associated with St. Patrick, while the Dunling, the House of Dunling, who probably took over Kildare after St. Brigid, but now pretended they owned her, to the extent that the name of the King of Leinster in one of the oldest legends is Dunling, the ancestor of the O'Dunlinga. So we have this, where you have the political rivalry, and the political rivalry very strong. Lear was buried apparently standing up in Meath, facing against the House of Dunling, with whom he'd had so many wars. So Kildare and Meath at war. Where would you go with that? But that's the political rivalry was turned into a rivalry that's sometimes associated with saints as well, because we ended up with 3 very strong saints associated with churches. Saint Patrick with Armagh and with the Kings of Meath, St. Brigid with the Kings of Leinster, and particularly with the House of Dunling, and then we had Munster and Cashel. And I am fascinated by the fact that St. Alba, who is the founder of, and the sacred, said to have preceded Patrick even in Munster, and associated with Emly, and with obviously he's buried in Emly, and his cross is in Emly. He also is named as the founder of Clane. And we also have wells, 3 wells to St. Columkill, who would have been Iona. Iona, there wasn't a political boundary between Ireland and Scotland in those days. Kells was part of the Iona. And then we have St. Kieran in Clonmacnoise. And even within our territory here, we have St. Kevin, who was born in Kildare and ended up with a more powerful monastery because Kildare was so vulnerable. It never really recovered from the first sacking of the Vikings. And a lot of the action went to Glendalough afterwards. And action, when I say action, I mean miracles, I mean money. I mean pilgrims bringing money. St. Brigid is also the founder of this little church. You'd be familiar with it. It's where famously where Arthur Guinness is buried, up near Ardclough and up near Kill. And it's said to be a different St. Brigid. And what fascinates me about this St. Brigid, because she was 100 years after the original, may have been named from the original, is that she was more or less the patron of one of the wings of the House of Doomling. And we had a little bit of battles between the 3 houses, not continuously. The way they worked it was they swapped the kingship of Leinster between the 3 houses over a period of 300 years. It's a huge achievement, involved a lot of compromise. Occasionally there was a falling out. One of those fallings out indirectly, or perhaps directly, led to the Battle of Clontarf, we all remember from our school books. But St. Brigid was one of the strands of the House of Doonling, the House of Donacha, based in Lyons Hill, and the parallel hill to Lyons Hill is Uachtarard, and St. Brigid's monastery ended up on top of that. And we know so little about that second Brigid that there is a second saint who had a more highborn, had a more better connections, was also associated with the monastery. And we ended up with the strand based in Lyons Hill controlling the abbacy in the monastery in Kildare town. So obviously they had so they decided that if you're going to build up your credentials, the way all these medieval knights look to St. George slaying the dragon and put it on their shields, you'll adopt a saint. It's adopt a saint time, and when you're at war, it's adopt a saint time. And they adopted St. Brigid. Having had a Brigid of their own, they adopted the St. Brigid of Kildare. One of the legends, and you've got to remember who's paying the guys who are writing this down. One of the legends from the Bachabricha is that the House of Doonling St. Brigid put a curse on their enemies, the House of Mull. So if you're going to battle, the first thing you tell is your saint has put a curse on the enemy. Always good for morale, that important point in the dressing room before your great battle. The manuscripts are beautiful, and there are so many of them. This is the first saint to have a full life written of her, long before Patrick. This is the first saint to have so many lives written about her. She had 6 biographies in 200 years after she died, and there's an argument over which of 3 of them. And these guys in the Bollandists in the 1600s took a lot of the manuscripts we still don't have access today to put together the Sancta Sanctorum. It's really the source for all those great stories about Irish saints that we still have today, and they are the competition between Irish saints. A lot of it related to miracles, a lot of it related to the wonder tales, and the wonder tales about wolves and third milkings of cows and stopping the storm and all of that. Of course they're going to be allegorical, but unfortunately then in the 1800s, 1900s, people started looking for historiography and started looking for real historical facts out of them, and the wonder tales didn't stand up. And it hasn't been good for the tradition of St. Brigid that people tried to look at all these miracles and say, well, what's the verification for this? How do we know any of this is true? And rejected the lot, when in fact it's very, very, very interesting. Mario Esposito was the acknowledged St. Brigid scholar of the 1890s and 1900s, and he decided that the first biography of St. Brigid in Latin, the one immediately before Cogitosus, was the earliest. Then he changed his mind and he said the one that's in Irish, the Bachabricha, is the oldest. But it's not that important because they all seem to draw around the same time and within a period of about 70 or 80 years of each other on a pool of miracles and a pool of folklore and a pool of earlier written literature that was common to them, but also each of them found something different. So we are in that luxurious position, which is in very few, across Europe, you won't find very many saints from that time, that you've so many good sources for their culture and their cult. And I say that because despite the fact she's so many biographies, we know so little about her. All we know is the bits that were added in about the druid, about the sword, about you end up with all the emphasis being put on the miracles. And maybe there was an assumption that everybody knew her life story, but we get nothing, virtually nothing about her life. Even the date, and we're celebrating it, is disputed, the date of her death. So we have a very solid Saints' Day, February the 1st. In Portugal, it's February the 2nd. I don't know how that happened, but we can all agree February the 1st is her Saints' Day, and we've virtually nothing else. And what did that do for us today here? It gives us this tabula rasa. It gives us this saint that we know so little about that anybody can sort of say, oh, well, St. Brigid be in favour of this. St. Brigid was a woman of the world, about the storm. She calmed nature. She'd be into climate change. Somebody compared her with Greta Thunberg. Somebody said she'd be an ideal candidate for the Green Party. Tourism, Kildare tourism, are worked out their St. Brigid's Trail, and they've sorted out that there could be a pilgrimage or a visiting aspect to this. They have a long way to go in it, and tourism is something I talk about an awful lot, and I will be talking about to Kildare tourism in a few weeks' time. But what is fascinating is that when things go in and out of fashion, as they do with saints, with miracles, with churches, St. Brigid is in an ideal position to navigate all of that, because when the Catholic Church came under pressure and membership began to drop, St. Brigid got reinvented almost as this fiery-haired goddess that everyone could identify, a champion of feminism. Before the Normans arrived, she was a bishop. People were saying, how can a woman be a bishop? Because in fact, we don't know if women could be bishops, because by the 11th and 12th century, misogyny had taken over the church, and the whole notion of a woman being a bishop was so anathema to them that bits were added in that Brigid had to be ordained by a bishop. But in the 70s and 80s, all of this got pulled out again and said, hold on a moment, Brigid is a champion of feminism. She's a champion of equality. And most of all, and this is what the bit she never lost, she's a champion of the poor. She's a champion of the care, our connection with animals, for the care for the environment that means that the cows will be milked and the grass will grow. And she's a champion of piety, dedicating everything to, and that's the wonderful cross in Kildare with some of the miracles. 126 of them, as I said. So it's very hard to know it's very hard to know where to start. You end up with the very first miracle mirroring Jesus' first miracle. It's the one where she changes water into beer. And obviously there are no vineyards in Kildare in 500. Jesus' first miracle is changing water into wine. This is the most famous miracle of all, and it's a modern invention. And it's the one the kids love. And it turned up in that hymn that somebody wrote, in the lovely hymn in the 1920s. But it's basically, it first shows up. John Dunton was a bookseller. The historians here will be very familiar with it because he left quite a good deal of description of Kildare in the 1690s, 1696 he was through. And he mentioned something that in Kildare town he heard about a version of the Carthage miracle, where a cloak was put together with bits of leather to expand the amount of territory that could be used for a church. And then a guy called John Denver, who was observing, not John Denver, you fill up my senses, but John Denver, VEIR, and he was a soldier, and he was in the Corry. He left very interesting writings of his encounters with Kildare. The Corry, very important in our history because it didn't exist in the 1820s, and then it had 6,000 people. It was the biggest town in the county, and then it disappeared again. The Corry camp. It's quite, in terms of the history of geography, to have your biggest town in the county, and then gone again. It's quite an extraordinary sequence of events, and what it means to us is it left us with observational stuff by a lot of the guys who come through and served as soldiers. John Denver was told by Father Malachy, the parish priest in Suncroft, about this amazing story where St. Brigid was told, she asked how it was told she could only take as much land, by King Dunlun, by the way, as her cloak would cover. So the magical expanding cloak is now the best known Brigid miracle, but the very first reference we have to it is in the 1860s. It's not in the Baccha Brita, it's not in Cogitosus or the Vita Prime, and they were all written within 100 years of her death. So you imagine if it was that big a miracle would be in there, but it's not. But it doesn't matter because the miracles that are in there may have no more provenance than the magical expanding cloak. It's again something that modern eyes and modern ears and modern children especially identify with it, and makes Brigid more accessible. And we're all talking about what's the access points to Brigid. These are all access points. This is the Brigid of our grandmothers. Very pious. She forsake marriage. She served the church. She was the quiet nun. The nuns at that era were dedicated to quiet servitude. There was no sense of them going out and demanding land with their cloak. There was a sense that they would serve in a secondary role in the church, and that's Fahard, where they part of the bones that I talked about, and this would be the Brigid of the 50s and 60s, reed crosses, and the woman who bringing the animals, caring for the animals, always veiled, like she's wearing an abaya in modern Middle East. I would like the angels of heaven to be among us. I would like Jesus to be present. All of that, the piety and the imagery of her veiled is a pretty... It came in the... from about the 1400s on. And remember, she's dead for a long, long time before that. But the piety and this Eusebian theory of the world where everything comes from God, every single small aspect of life comes from God. That was what Brigid, that's right through, it's consistently right through all the Brigid writings. And then the name. Some of you in the room will remember when everybody was called Brigid. Now nobody's called Brigid. And this woman here is called Brigid with a DGET. And she comes from another strand of Brigid, which is quite interesting, that Brigid was, in 1303, a young girl in Sweden was named Brigid in honour of St. Brigid of Kildare. She became St. Brigid of Sweden. And most of the Brigids you come across Europe, including Bridget Jones, were named with, say, the second Brigid in mind, Brigitte Bardot. And it's all much more fashionable than Brede or Brigid. And we had so many Brigids. It was a top 5 finish in the names for young girls in Ireland, right up till about 1964. And then it collapsed. and it's not even the top 100 now. But all is not lost, because we now have this movement, Mary Condren, The Serpent and the Goddess. Some of you will have read it. I think the year was 1979 on that. And then she questioned whether Brigid as existed at all. Because Brigid was, comes across, there's a strong movement of Brigid being the fire goddess, the goddess of life, the goddess of the earth. And it's based on two or three things. It's based on the word being so close to the word for fire. It's based on a tribe which was described by the Romans, and it's also based on writings from Irish mythology, that there was a saint, there was a goddess Brigid long before the Saint Brigid. It's hugely fashionable, or was hugely fashionable in the 80s and the 90s, and it meant that we have people, who gather and dance around in circles and sing in praise of Brigid the goddess rather than Saint Brigid. But one of the things I would caution on that, and it's a very important point, is that almost all of the words to do with light have a breach. They have a breach. They come from the root of breach in the Celtic languages, the 6 Celtic languages. And the name Brigid, when she was born, and I'm assuming she's a real person, because I think it's a pretty safe assumption, it would be a name you would give the brightness, to someone who's bright, the light in your life. The second caution, and it's more important, is that particularly in the Irish context, all we know about pre-Christian Ireland was written after Christian Ireland had started. There wasn't any writing. We've no real surviving own literature. All we have is a few stones. The most important description of Brigid the goddess was written in Castledermot, Cormac's Psalter, and it was written around the 1100s. So he was describing something that probably might have been still in the folklore, but was now 700 years obscured or overtaken by Christian tradition. So there is a point to be made, and it can't be proven, very difficult to prove it, very difficult even to advance it, that the pre-Christian Brigid could be a mirror of the Christian Brigid, brought in for allegorical or just for storytelling purposes by people writing in from the 800s, 900s, 1000s on. And Cormac's Psalter would have gathered some of that literature. So we could have, instead of the Celtic goddess creating the Christian saint, we could have the Christian saint creating the Celtic goddess. It's not something that we're ever going to see conclusive proof on. But does it matter? Because this amazing Brigid with the fiery red hair and the light, and she is giving access to a whole group of people for whom the pious Brigid and the nun would not be something they'd identify with. Brigid sold her sword. One of the great miracles or one of the great early stories is she sold her sword because she was a woman of peace. And then we ended up with Brigid as the warrior goddess. I think she's in a video game as a warrior goddess. And we now have the 3 Brigids, the 3 saints of Ireland. And she becomes associated with steel. And remember how important iron is. You could tell how important a town was in old Ireland before the middle of the 1700s by how many forges it had. If a town had 3 forges, it was a big town. If it had only 1, forges and iron were what made the world work. It was how the economy worked. And Saint Brigid became a goddess, a smithy, a goddess of ironwork. She also, and this nominated this obscure cogitosus, not cogitosus, but Conlet, who became a patron god of ironwork, or a patron saint of ironwork in his own right. And he was a smith. So she becomes the smith. She's no longer the saint or the goddess, but she is now the woman who is associated not with cows anymore, but with the fashioning of iron, and everything came from iron. The horseshoes, the swords, the roofs, the bits that held buildings together. This was in Dublin Airport. It's part of a car advertising campaign. And that's St. Brigid beating her iron with the car in the background, of course, because we had a few of those in the 400s. But again, does it matter? This Brigid the Smith became an image in her own right. And again, does it matter because it's an access point back to this amazing woman. And the attributes which she had, that piety, that caring for others, that doing good for mankind, and standing up against greed and exploitation, and always on the side of the poor. The slaves, we had a lot of slaves in Kildare in the 400s by reading the lives, but she was always on the side of the slave. And that probably made her exportable as well, another major factor in why Brigid went so far and then disappeared, because she went to all these countries and none of those place names she's associated with are modern. Usually they were very important. They were St. Brigid's Church, and then they were taken over by another saint, or she just disappeared. She was just wiped out. And the telling of the story, Noel Kazan's book, is really, really great there. The telling of the story then became an attempt to put together a patchwork of little bits and pieces of surviving stories. Some of them are very old, some of them are new, some of them are added on. But it's quite clear that soon after St. Brigid of Sweden was born in 1300, her day is done. St. Brigid is not as well known internationally as St. Patrick nowadays. That would be unthinkable 800 years ago. That would be unthinkable that somebody so important that her footprint extended across Western Europe. We actually now have to sit down, as I do 100 times on trips, 100 times a year on trips, and say, oh, it's not St. Brigid of Sweden we're talking about. The firehouse, a lot of what happened in Kildare Cathedral was 1800s. The fire that was the eternal flame, where did we get that? We got mainly that. The best known description is from Geraldus Cambrensis, Gerald of Wales. And this is again 700 years after she lived. And was this association with fire, how important was it that in the church, that the fire, the flame that was lit in the church that's described in the earliest biographies, was that new to the church, or was that something much older? Because here's a beautiful thought which I haven't again we can never I can promulgate with and wait for the reaction, but every church in the world, every Catholic church in the world has a light burning, and as far as I can make out, that is a tradition that does not predate the 400s. And that could be something, that could be yet another thing we pass to that important cult of Brigid, which spread all over Europe, and then from about the 1300s disappeared, and we're left with the churches, with the fires burning in the church, sacristy lamps, without knowing where it came from, because there's quite a good deal of dispute and a little bit of scholarship, not enough really, but where it came from. And St. Brigid, again, she could be in the heart of all of that action. I'm probably overrunning my time now. I'm coming to 44 minutes. How are we doing, Brian? Grand. And these are what modern artists have done with the story of St. Brigid. We've taken taken light, taken the Irishness of her, always associated with red hair, and with the reed cross, which isn't there in the earliest biographies. And I started with artificial intelligence, and I'm going to finish with artificial intelligence. I just asked artificial intelligence what St. Brigid looked like. Can you give me a picture of St. Brigid? And there she is in the 400s. As I say, created by technology that didn't exist 12 months ago, never mind 1,500 years ago. But artificial intelligence doesn't draw much distinction, because I went back in again and I said, that's a lovely image, but can you give me another one? And I think this could be the St. Brigid for the new generation. Gurmila Marga, thank you very, very much.